welcome to the Tech 45 podcast. I'm your host, Jack Ryan. Today I have the privilege of interviewing one of my close friends. We met in the Army over a decade ago, Austin Caroe. Austin, do you mind briefly introducing yourself for the 7 listeners that I have on this podcast?
Sure, man. So I'm Austin Caroe. I am a major in the United States Army, and I have to start with everything that I say on this podcast. I am speaking in my personal capacity. I am not here speaking for the U.S. Army or the U.S. government. I speak only for myself.
Yep, totally.
So just a little bit of my background. So I've been in uniform in some capacity since I was 13 years old. I went to an all-male boys military school at Valley Forge Military Academy in Pennsylvania. So I did my 10th, 11th, and 12th grade there, and then I did ROTC at Temple University, transferred to Vanderbilt University, and I finished out there. Commissioned as an infantry officer in 2011, went to infantry school, and then Ranger school, and then met up with you, Jack, at 136 Infantry there in C Company at Fort Bliss.
Wow, wild times. Yeah, I definitely want to talk a little bit about your background, and then we can obviously pick it up like where our paths converged at Fort Bliss, Texas. But one of the things I was thinking about in the last half hour leading up to this podcast before you hopped on is, and this kind of stemmed from, I took my kids on a little field trip yesterday to the Marine Corps Museum in Quantico. And I was trying to, get a grasp on, why do we serve? Why do we serve? We were looking up the numbers, the Marine Corps being one of the smaller armed forces units in the DoD. The Army maybe, has maybe 3 or 4 times as many service members as the Marine Corps. Why do we serve? What from a young age, it sounded like you had a keen interest, or maybe were encouraged by a family member or friend to serve in some sort of military capacity. Why did you choose to join the Army?
So that's a great question. That's a good place to start. So I grew up, I don't know if you're familiar with the Duggars.
Yeah.
The 19 Kids and Counting or whatever. So I grew up in a very similar type of community, a very conservative, but also pacifist church. And so it was so intense that when I got Army men from McDonald's, because Toy Story had just come out, and the Army men, Army men were in the Happy Meals, my mother cut the guns off of my Army men because guns kill people, and guns are bad, and people and armies are bad. So so the family kind of evolved and moved away from that. 9/11 happened, and we're both, we were both young kids when that happened. I was probably 10, you were probably 12 or 13.
Correct.
And it was just like, I'm sad because I'm so young that this war is going to be over by the time I get to serve. Little did I know that I would be 10 years old when the towers came down, and I would end up doing 3 deployments to Afghanistan. So going back to your question, like, why do you serve? So I joined really for kind of the young man's adventure. Like, I love this country. I love serving, but for me, when I initially joined, it was the thing to do, just because it was adventurous. It was going to have that experience. Now, joining is one thing, staying is another. So I've been active now for over 12 years, and a lot of moves, and I've had 3 kids and gotten married. And so, it's tough on family life. So joining is one thing, staying is another. And really the reason that I've stayed, and I've considered getting out multiple times, but the reason that I've stayed is just because of the soldiers. I love soldiers, especially E4 and below. The shenanigans that they pull, the ridiculous things that they do, the ingenious, brilliant things that they do that you would never expect. There's just nothing like it, right? There's absolutely nothing like it. And being a company commander really solidified that for me. So joined for the adventure, stayed for the soldiers. And really, it is an honor to serve this country. Like, I really do just love the United States, especially as, if you travel around, you talk to other people. This is a great country. It's worth fighting for, and I'm proud to serve.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I don't want to get into a a total patriotic tangent, but I'm down to if you are. But yeah, this country really, to me, is kind of a beacon of hope, not only in the Western world, but in the world at large. There's, what we have here in the U.S. is really unique in human existence, in my opinion, and it is worth fighting for. I fully agree with you. But yeah, I joined for the same reasons. I definitely had a patriotic urge that was further solidified by 9/11. I was in my 7th grade civics class when the towers fell, and I remember my teacher at the time, Mr. Ostrander, who was also a veteran. He was a Navy veteran. He was a combat diver. He wheeled in one of those little TV carts. I don't know if you remember those, but a little TV on wheels. He wheeled it in to our 7th grade civics class in Virginia, and we watched, and we were only probably less than 20 miles away from from the Pentagon when this was happening. But he wheeled in, and my neighbor actually got killed in the 9/11 attacks because I grew up in Northern Virginia. So I had personal people that I knew that were affected by, both the New York City and the Washington, D.C., well, Arlington, Virginia, rather, attacks. So it definitely hit close to home, quite literally. And that further solidified, my reason for joining. But I'd be lying if I didn't say there was definitely a sense of adventure that was kind of tickled that sense of adventure, and joining the Army, and you watch the Army commercials, and I always loved playing in the woods and playing with BB guns and explosives and fireworks, and I got to do all those things in real life as an infantry officer like you described. So I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. I just got out of the Army. I continued my service in the reserves after our pass diverged off active duty. When I got off active duty in 2015, I did 2 company commands in the reserves, and being in charge of soldiers, or having the privilege to lead soldiers that you're all wearing the American flag on your right shoulder, and having a similar purpose and a shared sense of accomplishment was really truly incredible. And I don't know, as you move up the ranks and you're a major now, you have the ability to influence what goes on in your unit in a much bigger way than you did when you were a lieutenant, when you and I were lieutenants. So I don't know if you can talk about that a little bit more, because I think that's one of the reasons you've stayed in, is because you've seen that you actually are in the driver's seat now, and you have the ability to affect change that can affect a lot of people.
Yeah, it definitely changes with scale. So right now I'm in the G3 for a division, and a division is 3 brigades. It's about around 17,000 people. So you have a real direct influence as a company commander, as a platoon leader, even down in a battalion. You have a direct influence on people. It's much more indirect once you get up to the division. So when you're up at the division and things are happening, you have to realize how slowly or how quickly you move, and how detailed or how sloppy your work is going to have massive impacts that are not easily taken back. So, for example, if you publish an order and you're off in your timeline by a day, by 2 days, or even by a few hours, you will very quickly start getting phone calls from people with problems. And now, or they won't realize that that a mistake has been made. They'll start planning off of that time, and everything will revolve around that. And eventually, Private Snuffy down in an infantry squad has planned his day around an event that was supposed to start it's actually going to start at noon, but you published and said it was going to start at 09. So now, instead of Snuffy showing up to work regularly at 9 for a 12 o'clock thing, Snuffy's now showing up at 6 a.m. And or even worse, the reverse might be true. And so Snuffy finds out that he is going to have to be in extra early, the day before or the night before, and it can just mess up all of his plans. And multiply Snuffy by 17,000 people. And so the work that you do at echelon, at scale, has to be extraordinarily detailed, extraordinarily accurate, and it needs to be projected out as far as you possibly can. And if you as an officer want to sit back and be lazy and wait for problems to happen, you are affecting the lives of a significant number of people, and it's very easy to lose sight of that. And so I try I try to keep that in mind. And I try to help coach my peers that direction too. And sometimes they coach me in that direction.
That is so awesome to hear that. And as you move up the ranks, either in the military or in a corporate setting, or even a small business, you have to understand that your decisions and the way you plan out events have a huge effect on the people that you're in charge of leading. And it's your duty to put a lot of effort and a lot of thought into the timeline and the timing of these events.
100%. And I wrote a long essay that was broken into 2 parts called Laziness about this very topic, which really comes down to, at scale, at echelon, you should be doing as little as possible, because everything that you do is going to have second and third order effects that you cannot possibly imagine, especially at such a large organization. And I tell a short story in there about, a general who these are all fake. There's not like real people here, but about a division commander who's like, we've had a lot of traffic accidents, so we're going to do a safety stand down day next week. Cancel everything.
Yeah. I've seen that happen.
We've seen stuff like that. That's right. It happens. And so, you'll do the safety stand down day, training will get canceled, everything will get moved around. The lives of 17,000 people have now changed, more than that, actually, because you also have their family members, have all changed. Everything's changed. You have this huge whiplash effect. But the worst part is traffic fatalities will probably go down after that. And so the problem is, it wasn't the safety stand down day that caused the traffic accidents to go down. The reason they went up in the first place was probably just random fluctuation.
Yep.
It was just noise. But by having a safety stand down day, and now traffic accidents go down, we've now tricked not only the general, but the entire staff into thinking safety stand down days make fewer traffic fatalities happen. So let's do one of these once a quarter.
I want to pull on that. What you just said, one thing that stuck out to me is, and it's, I know this is silly to compare it to the movie Forgetting Sarah Marshall, but maybe as you go up in ranks, you should think about doing less, do less, right?
Yeah.
Do less. Because if you have a good idea that, may have an impact on 17,000 soldiers, if it's not well thought out, or if it's not, vetted by, some stakeholders within the organization, it could have, kind of a bad effect on the organization. One of the things I like about your writing, and for those that aren't aware, Austin hosts a Substack newsletter called The Distro, which is, highlighted in his background. There you go. And you also have a YouTube channel. What's your YouTube channel again?
If you just search my name, Austin Caroe, I think
They're
it's
easy to find.
I think it's, you can just search it on there. There's a couple okay videos on there.
I like the videos. I think what the content you put out there is helpful for young leaders, or maybe people that are in the pipeline to be a leader in the Army. And I think you've made a deliberate effort to kind of share your thoughts, your successes, your failures, and what's worked for you in a very honest way. From my perspective, it's a very honest way. And I found it impactful. I love your writing. And one of the things I love your writing. I always make an effort to read your newsletter. I look forward to it when I see it in my inbox. I gravitate towards it whenever I see it come up on my...
Nobody else sends me such quick and detailed and excellent praise and feedback. You're my top reader.
Oh, good. No, that's good to hear. But one of the things I like about one of your articles, and this plays into what you were saying earlier, when it sounds like you take a lot of effort into planning a lot of these training events, and probably a lot of the operational actual exercises that you've done overseas. I like how you've made a deliberate effort to set up systems that reduce the amount of manual effort and manual labor associated with, let's say, document management, making changes to documents that, let's say dozens of people are going to read. Can you talk a little bit about that? This is something it's often a boring topic for some, but it's something that has caused me a lot of pain points. And I've been, both in the Army, which I had, from my perspective now, the unit I was in, and the units I've been in the Army, didn't do a very good job of their digital management and their document management. And I've worked for some companies that do an okay job. And I've worked for some companies that are just like excellent at it. And you just know where every single document you could ever need, every customer document, every invoice, every project, every PowerPoint, every template, where everything is. And it's because we had deliberate processes that were created to make sure that we removed a lot of the unnecessary work involved with exchanging information digitally. Can you briefly talk about like what systems have worked and have helped eliminate confusion or wasted time when you're with regards to sending documents back and forth?
Yeah, 100%. So very easy example. And to some people, they'll roll their eyes at this example because it's so obvious. To others, they'll be like, well, I should be doing that. I should be getting on that, but no one's really showed me, or I just haven't put a lot of effort into it. So the easiest thing, if you are compiling reports, or if you're compiling a document like a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint slide or whatever it is, and you need input from like 3 or 4 different people, if you are sending a blank template in an email and saying, hey, fill this out and send it back, make sure you put your changes in red. So
like an attachment, like you're going to attach it to the email.
Like you attach it to an email and say, hey, make the changes in this document and put those changes in red and then email it back to me. And then, you're getting 4 or 5 different spreadsheets back and you're making all the changes manually. Don't do that. Please don't do that.
Don't ever do that. I know I tell people all the time, do not send me an attachment if you can avoid it. It's a different scenario when you're dealing with customers. A lot of times you have to send an attachment because they don't have access to your internal systems. But internal communication, please send me a link or some sort of SharePoint file. Yeah.
So one of the things that I do is, one of the things we do in the headquarters, I used to do it, but I've transferred to someone else now because that's what I do. I'm the deputy G3, so I try to get rid of as much work for myself as possible and spread it out, spread the love. Is compiling the sit rep to our higher headquarters. Okay, now the sit rep, the situation report, comes from all the different subordinate units, and it's got to come from different staff sections inside the headquarters. So you just simply make a template in a Word document. You hang it on the portal, in the share portal, or you can hang it on Teams. You share the link. Everyone goes in and updates their portion. Now, it takes a little bit of education if this is new to an organization. It is worth the effort walking around the building or even driving around the post to show people how to use it. Or if you want to jump on Microsoft Teams, just do a screen share and take the time to show people how to use the systems. The biggest obstacle I've seen to people just using the basic digital systems correctly is the amount of education that it takes to get people to understand that they need to use these systems. And people are like, well, how am I going to teach 50 people that this is the way to do business? And it's like, you do it one at a time if you have to. Because
you do, yeah.
You do it one at a time, and it will save you in the long run. It doesn't seem like it would. It seems like it's a lot of work, and it is. So another example is there's different ways to use Microsoft Teams. The way that we had been using it was like every little individual section in the headquarters had their own team.
Yep.
Okay. This is a nightmare.
It is. It's an absolute nightmare.
Especially in the Army, because people are constantly coming and going. And so managing permissions for all these teams and who has access to what documents, and I'll invite you to my team and blah, blah, blah. And it's impossible. So one of the things that me and the knowledge manager wanted to do was get everybody onto one team. So we had to show people how to sync their files to their OneDrive and then upload them to a new channel inside of one collaboration team.
Yep.
So there's a lot of things that you need to do, but really it's just about effort. There's a bazillion different ways to skin the knowledge management cat, but it's about putting in the effort and making it a priority and focusing on it and not stopping and being relentless until you make it happen.
Yeah, sometimes you have to lead through sheer will, especially when it's it's a topic, as boring as document management or collaborative documents like you're describing. Like people don't think it's important, but when you start calculating all the wasted time by dozens and dozens of individuals, and Teams is a great tool, but if you're trying to manage 20 different channels, it's a nightmare. It's just
right.
It's almost more work. But I didn't want to hang on that topic too long, but I think if anybody doesn't have like a documented process for how to manage knowledge in the digital age, Austin has some great resources that I would highly recommend you check out. I've learned a lot from some of your writing, and I've adopted some of the practices that you've shared in my own business. So it's really it makes life easier. But on the topic of technology, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, I know I alluded to this in a text message I sent you. One of the things I like to ask people, although this was supposed to be a technology podcast, it's turning into a lot more than that. But what's your favorite machine or tool that you were exposed to in your life that really fascinates you and you really liked? Like you really feel like either gives you an edge in your military career, or something that you're fascinated with?
So I would say there's a couple different things. when I found GPS as a kid, and I was probably 11 or 10 or 11 years old when someone had a GPS at a Boy Scout camp, and I was just like, well, what's that thing? And they were like, well, it's a GPS. And I'm like, well, what is that? And it's like, it tells you where you are. And I'm like, well, like, why is that? Why do you need that? Like, you have a map, or a compass. Like, why would you need that thing? And, but over time I have really loved, playing with and experimenting with GPS and just really thinking about it.
Yep.
And you really start to appreciate GPS at Ranger School. Because
oh my gosh.
So at the beginning, obviously on the land navigation course, you can't use GPS. You've got to use your map and compass, and you've got to be a good navigator. When you get to Darby, you can use your GPS, but you can only use it like a couple of times. So you got to stop the whole squad. You got to pull security. Right. You got to get under the poncho. It's a whole thing, right?
I forgot about that.
Yeah, it's a pain. You can use it, but it's a pain to use it, and it slows you down. By the time you get to Florida phase, you can be walking with your GPS out, and it makes you move so much faster. Much faster. Because it just tells you, it just go this way and keep moving that way, and you're not worried about, you're not staring at your map. You can maintain much better situational awareness because you're not stressed about navigating. So your point man shouldn't be navigating either. Your point man should be focused on security, but everyone can rest assured that you're going the right way. And then, so GPS, I would say, is an incredible technology, and it's so interesting because it just tells you a very simple piece of information that you would think is easy, which is, where am I right now? Yep. And then when you expand that out to the Army's Blue Force Tracker System, or whatever it's called, FBCB2 these days, not only can you see where you are, you can see where all your friends are.
Yep.
And that turns out to be really, really important. And when we look at, how important is it? For people that know about Desert Storm, and we talk about the left hook, and we love to talk about maneuver warfare, how we moved to the west and then outflanked the Iraqis by coming through that desert. Well, it's very interesting. You look at that and you're like, well, wouldn't these idiots know that we would just flank them by, moving around their wide open flank? And the Iraqis had considered it, but the reason they didn't think we were going to do it was because they frequently did exercises out there. And what happened every single time they did exercises out there? They got lost.
Yep.
They didn't know where they were because it's literally, there's no terrain. It's just flat, open desert. There's no roads. There's no nothing. There's no landmarks. And if you lose, it's very easy to lose track of where you are, but also think about it at scale. It's hard for two units to meet at a specific location.
It is.
Because if you're off by just a couple of kilometers, you're not going to see each other. And the smaller you go in echelon, the harder those link ups get. And the bigger you get at echelon, it's significantly harder to maneuver your people, because it's like, hey, Bravo Company, where are you? I don't know.
It's so true. And you can even get in the wrong azimuth. So like what Austin is referring to, for those who haven't tried to like navigate in an open desert, it's very difficult when you don't have like terrain features to orient yourself to. And your compass could give you like the right cardinal direction, but if it's off like by 4 or 5 degrees and you drift off course, you end up being way, way far off your objective or where you're supposed to link up, which can have disastrous effects on the operation. So
and to drive it home, if I'm a company commander, a tank company commander, and I need fuel, I need you to bring me fuel, I've got to tell you exactly where I am.
Yep.
You have to know exactly. And with GPS, it's just like, hey, I'm at, Whiskey Tango 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8, and then they just punch it into their thing, or they put it on a map, they plot it on the map, and they say, okay, he's at that 8-digit grid location, and an 8-digit grid location is good to within 10 meters.
I was going to say 10 or 1. I'd say either 1 or 10. I can't remember.
I think 10 digits is down to 1. Yeah, 10
yeah,
digits.
No, you're right.
Yeah,
you're right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, no. I think an 8-digit gets you to 50 meters.
Is it 50 meters?
It's 50 meters for 8. Yeah,
okay.
That's right. It's 50 meters for 8 and 1 meter for 10. So anyway, we're just nerding out on Army stuff. Love it. So that's why operations in that desert were hard. And the Iraqis were like, we're going to see them coming. They're going to be super slow. They're going to run out of gas. They're not going to know. They can't operate out there. It's impossible. It'll be funny to watch them try. They didn't know we had GPS. It was a brand new technology. And
it was brand new. Yeah.
It was brand new. And so, and they're right. if we didn't have GPS, there's absolutely no way that flanking maneuver that we did of the entire Iraqi army would have worked. So you had to have that technology.
I love your ability to synthesize technologies throughout, both, historical combat scenarios that might have taken place 100 or 200 years ago. And then as you synthesize technologies that were relevant in more modern conflicts like Desert Storm, I love it when you get into these stories because that's something I didn't really know. I knew GPS was a military technology. It's an array of satellites that were deployed in low Earth orbit, I believe, and those give you space and time positioning and communicate with a handheld device or a device that's mounted in a vehicle as well. And now you have it on your wrist. I have a GPS right here on my wrist, which is incredible, and it's an extremely accurate GPS. And one of my favorite things to study is how humans have navigated the planet, not only the planet, how humans navigate the universe. And if you go into the Air and Space Museum in DC, I don't know if they still have this exhibit, but they had a whole huge giant room dedicated to navigation and how humans have navigated the planet and outside the planet for the last, I don't know, 10,000 years. And it started with the sextant. The sextant was a mechanical device and an optical device that you look through and then measure the distance between stars, mainly for maritime navigation. So navigating in open water has its own challenges. And then you had the evolution of, the compass, and then they get into like kind of the first forms of GPS and then how that evolved. And then there's even more complicated ways of navigating that have aerospace applications where you have laser gyros that have positioning, the ability to show your position in outer space, because you can't rely on GPS in outer space, especially when you lose contact with those satellite arrays. So what they do is you have avionics that have laser gyros that measure where you are in time and space. So you can theoretically navigate if you have the right power source, you can navigate for an unlimited amount of time in space. And as we continue to explore the universe, that'll be even more critical to have advanced navigation devices that work like that. But what's cool about what Austin was saying is, as an infantry officer on the ground, whether you served in Desert Storm or Operation Enduring Freedom or Operation Iraqi Freedom, any of these modern conflicts where an infantry officer like Austin and I would have a GPS on their wrist, you'd have one in your backpack likely, and you'd likely have one mounted in your vehicle. So it was rare that I ever went out on a mission in Afghanistan without 3 different GPS units, sometimes 4 different GPS units, all with pre-plotted points that kind of showed you where to go. So can you speak on that? And like, I don't know how soldiers are using GPS now, but I imagine it's kind of it's a similar probably thought process, but I don't know, maybe it's evolved more. I don't know.
No, so it has evolved pretty significantly, and it's going to continue to evolve. What we're trying to train for now is being in a degraded and denied environment.
Right.
And so at the CTCs, at the combat training centers, like the National Training Center, and for those listening, that's like a big war game that you do. So you deploy all of your military equipment that you would deploy like you're going to war, but you go to California to a big training area called the National Training Center. And there they will spoof your GPS. They'll tell you that you're in a place that you're not. They can do that. They can deny your GPS, so they can completely shut it down. Or they can just mess with it, make you jump all over the place so that you just stop using it. So you stop relying on it. So we're really right now, we're training to operate in a degraded environment, and we're really focusing on trying to get people back to analog systems and things like that. But so that's on one side. On the other side,
cool.
It's about ensuring our own PNT, position, navigation, and timing, and making sure that those networks are strong and are robust and won't go down, and the enemy won't be able to mess with them. But that also means that you and I, we just threw Garmin's on our wrists, and
I know
like,
that was
cool,
it.
look at me, I'm such a cool rifle platoon leader. Like, I know exactly where. Like, I'm, you can tell the guys that bought their own GPS, and stuff like that.
Totally.
That's not going to fly anymore.
It's not,
because there's nothing encrypted about that. The enemy will be able to use those satellites. I think most of the Garmin stuff, I think, uses GLONASS, which is a Russian thing. I think, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think so.
So, and the Ukrainians are doing it, and part of the problem is, you're just camouflaging against the herd. So if every single person in the Ukrainian army or Russian army is using, Garmin or equivalent GPSs, it's just like, well, who cares? Like everyone's using it. So what difference does it make? But
I didn't think about that.
That's right. So that's not the game that we're going to play. And so it's going to be a lot more like Ranger School, where if you want to use a GPS, you've got to use your military issued dagger to actually navigate. And we have to make sure that those that PNT system, the position, navigation, and timing, that system is robust. Because also remember, what do we have to have in our radios to make them work? We have to have the right time.
Yeah,
and
it's true.
We won't go into the technical, unless you want to. We won't go into the technical details of why you have to have. Everyone has to have their radio set to the right GPS time. It just has to do with how the frequency jumping algorithms work. You have to have the right time. So if the PNT system goes down, not only do you lose your GPS and your ability to navigate, but also your ability to communicate.
No, totally. That's something that I don't often think of. And for anybody that's out there seeking a career path that's going to be very fruitful in the future, anything to do with PNT engineering or associated skill sets is going to be in high demand in the future. I can guarantee that. And one thing to add on to what Austin said, what I thought was really cool when I was working in the aviation industry, I was selling avionics for airplanes, and one of the key things that the FAA was trying to do, and the European equivalent was doing as well, is they were trying to require that every commercial aircraft that flies in the U.S., if you need to be legal to fly in the U.S., has to have ADS-B, which is the ability to track aircraft using onboard GPS units that are accurate down to 3 meters. So this did two things. It's really, really cool technology, but every aircraft that flies in the U.S. has to be compliant with this mandate. I think the mandate took effect in like 2019 or 2020, I think. January 2020 was like the date in the sand that they wanted. I don't know if they achieved that or not. But one of the things that's cool, so there's two things why you got to have this accurate GPS transmitter on your aircraft. And one is for ATC, so air traffic control. They have to be able to keep the aircraft, in a tight group so they can more efficiently land aircraft and make sure aircraft take off safely from airports. So that's, the primary reason is kind of like being able to know where all the aircraft are in a very accurate method. The second is to enable a lot of these aircraft to land. What a lot of airports are going towards is, some of these smaller auxiliary airports. So, think not like Atlanta, think like El Paso airport or smaller, maybe only like 20, 30, 40 flights a day, or maybe even smaller than that.
Well, El Paso's getting big. I don't know if you've been here. Oh, dude. When was the last time you were here? Sorry to throw us off on the tangent.
It's been a while. So,
bro, city's totally different.
I believe it.
It's massive. And the airport's growing a lot. But anyway, sorry.
El Paso is probably not a good example anymore. But
stand up for the 915.
Hell yeah. So what most people don't understand is like there's about 400 airports in the U.S. that are serviced by commercial jets, where you can go on Google Flights and pick out a flight and get to your destination. There's actually 4,000 airports in the U.S. So most airports in the U.S. that are public are not serviced by commercial airliners like Delta, United, Frontier, Spirit. Most airports are for general aviation aircraft that are typically only carrying 2 to 3 passengers. And what's really cool about this GPS technology that's on board aircraft now is it's so accurate. It's accurate to within 3 meters. It's accurate enough to land an airplane under adverse weather conditions. So what that means is instead of the airport having to rely on really expensive RF technologies, radio frequency technologies, now you can have a GPS on board and have a GPS locator on the airport, which is very, very inexpensive to maintain compared to the RF technologies. And that can communicate with the aircraft and it'll help guide you in via the GPS, which you couldn't do before. The technology wasn't perceived as being accurate enough to safely help land an airplane on an instrument approach. So that's the kind of the two reasons. So situational awareness, making sure you know where all your airplanes are, so the air traffic controllers can safely coordinate that chaos. But then also having the ability to land in some of these smaller airports and reduce the costs associated with maintaining those expensive systems that you have at larger airports like ATL or DC or Dallas or any of the large Class A airspace airports. But yeah, I don't know. That's going off on a tangent. But GPS is really cool, And I often forget that, there's a big push within the DoD and other militaries to, either come up with aircraft or drones that can operate in GPS denied environments, or that just have no GPS on board and they just navigate through optical sensors or maybe other means where they don't rely on GPS at all. There's kind of a couple ways you can get around that GPS capability. So it's interesting to hear your thoughts on that. So
well, and when you really think about it, and this will segue into another kind of riff I wanted to go into.
yeah,
When you really think about it, what is GPS? It's giving you a piece of information. It's really about information. It's telling you exactly where you are, or it's telling someone else exactly where you are. It's telling you where someone else is. It's about information. And there's this great movie. It's a Japanese movie called Battle Royale. It's kind of what the Hunger Games was based on. People have kind of accused the author of the Hunger Games of kind of ripping off Battle Royale.
oh, okay.
But it's a great movie. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it to people. And so in this movie, it's the same type of thing. They take a bunch of school kids and they put them on this island where they're going to do battle. And they have them sitting in a classroom. Excuse me one second.
Yeah, no worries.
Sorry. So they have them sitting in a classroom, and instead of like in the Hunger Games, they have the cornucopia and have everyone sprint at it. They call people's names up one by one, and then they give them, a bag or something, and then they run out. They're all wearing these collars, right? And if it's like, well, if there's more than one person alive at the end of whatever, 72 hours, whatever it is, then all the collars explode and everybody dies. So
wow.
Everyone has to, right. So everyone has to, the kids have all got to try to kill each other. Obviously it's a very dark movie. So by one, they're calling them out of the classroom, and they give them a bag, and then they run off into the island. And, various weapons are given out. One guy gets a machine gun. Another guy gets like a trash can lid. Someone else gets like a bow and arrow. Someone gets a katana. Someone gets a rope. I mean, there's just all these random things that they're giving out. But there's one thing that they give away, which by far is the most important thing, which is a device with a screen that shows you exactly where everyone else is on the island. And no weapon that you're going to get, no machine gun. I mean, unless they're going to give you, no, there's literally nothing they could give you that is more valuable if you wanted to win this game than a screen that tells you where everybody is.
Totally.
Period. And
yeah,
so
totally.
That really drives home the importance of information and location information as it relates to conflict, as it relates to the battlefield. If you can know where you are, and you can figure out where your enemy is, and you can deny that information of where you are to him, you have an enormous advantage. And this is why, scouting, surveillance, reconnaissance, why those systems and the systems that we have that, and then the systems that those systems feed to build situational awareness are so important. And one of the things that's probably the biggest difference in the way that we train versus the way that we're going to fight is the amount of information that we have on the enemy. So when we go to train, you have very little information on where the enemy is going to be or where the enemy is. And these are all computer simulations, but there's humans on both sides of the battle. But their location information is very hard to ascertain. You have to find them with your systems. You got to use your own drones. You got to use your own all the equipment that you have for reconnaissance and surveillance. You have to use those inside the computer game to go and find the bad guys. But in real life, the amount of information that we're going to have is going to be significantly more than we have in training. And that gives us a huge edge, is just knowing where, think about all the things that you saw in open source about the Russians and where they were. Like, how many open source intelligence analysts were saying, hey, this is where the Russians are. Like,
it's wild.
They're here with this many tanks from this regiment. That information, it is insane how much information has changed the battlefield, and not just changed the battlefield, but changed politics, in our approach to conflict of, where people are massing and things like that. And I could probably go off on a whole nother riff about that, but yeah, information is extraordinarily important, and position information is absolutely vital.
Yeah, so I want to pull on that thread. I think that this is going to lead us into a really interesting discussion on drones. So there's two things I wanted to talk to you about with regards to I mean, really UAS of all sizes, but I'm talking about drones that are, easy to manufacture and easy to field. And there's two pieces to it. You have we're in a time right now where you could have a multitude of drones on the battlefield that might be hard to detect because they have a very small signature. So that's one thing. How do you find out where these drones are in the battlefield? But the other thing is the drones are likely, a lot of them are equipped with laser rangefinders that have positioning data associated with them. So not only are the drones hard to detect, but they can also detect you. They can detect you. And what you're seeing is there's a lot of emphasis being placed within the DoD and the Joint Counter UAS office regarding how do we detect these drones and find them and obviously eliminate the threat. But then how do we shield our soldiers from being detected and discovered by these drones, which I think is arguably maybe a little more difficult too. So I don't know if have you thought a lot about this?
Yeah. So I was a early adopter well, not an early adopter, but
Oh, you
talking
have
about
one, don't
small
you?
drones.
Oh, nice. That's awesome. That's
This
amazing,
is
dude.
a DJI. Oh shoot, I don't remember the model number, but it's the smallest one that's one of the smallest ones that you can get. This is 249 grams.
Ridiculous.
And so my lovely wife got this for me for Christmas some years ago. And as soon as I took it out, I was like, how does not every infantry platoon in the United States Army have like 30 of these things? Like
Exactly.
how
I feel the
how
same
have we
way. I
fought
feel the same
without
way.
this? Imagine if we'd had these downrange
Ridiculous.
during our deployment. It would have completely changed. It would have changed everything.
But a
Everything would
game
have been
changer.
different
Yeah, it would have been a game changer.
because it tells you exactly where it is. You can get it. It will tell you, hey, this is where I am. So if you just fly it over the bad guy, it will literally say, hey, this is my 10-digit grid coordinate. And remember, one of the things that frustrated us was we had that big balloon, that was over top of our combat outpost, that PGIS balloon. And one of our biggest frustrations was we needed it to be able to laze targets and give us accurate
Hmm.
10-digit grids, and they could never
Yep.
get it to work. Do you remember that?
Yeah. So what Austin is describing for people that aren't aware of these blimps, they're being implemented in austere environments at these combat outposts. They were used extensively in Afghanistan. It's basically a giant aerostat. So I think a giant blimp, the size of a school bus, some of them, and it has a high definition camera and a laser rangefinder on the bottom of it. That's the payload on the blimp. And there's various sizes of these. These are also used at the southern border as well. But that's what Austin is describing. It's a giant aerostat blimp with a really expensive camera on the bottom. But yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but the thing was, to your point, the drones now are able to use lasers, and they have much better ways of determining not just where they are, but where a spot that they're lasing is.
Yep.
We had, because that technology was relatively new, we couldn't even get it to work on our balloons, and we were like,
Correct.
we have this technology, why are we not using it, or why is it broken? Like, why can't you fix it? And it was months, and I don't know if you guys were able to ever to get it fixed, even after I left. But going back to your point, I just read a brilliant document that was translated, that was put together by some Russian veterans of Afghanistan and Chechnya and Ukraine, and they got together and put together this document. It's published on
Wow. That's cool.
It's published on Substack, called Lethal Minds, the Lethal Minds Journal. It's
Okay.
I highly recommend them.
I'll check it out. Lethal Minds. Lethal Minds.
Lethal Minds.
Cool.
Brilliant analysts that are writing and putting that thing together. So anyway, they were able to get a hold of this document and a translated version of this document. And what it is these Russian veterans writing to the new soldiers saying, hey, these are the things that you need to focus on to stay alive. And so it's written in earnest, and you can tell that in the language. One of the things they talk about is how drones have changed the battlefield. And even in trench warfare, one of the things that the veterans focus on is you have to stay still. A lot of these drones are not equipped with thermal. They're cheap. They're going to find you if you move.
Yep.
So if you move, you need to know, you have to have a really good reason as to why you're moving. Otherwise, get in your trench and don't move, because that's how they're going to find you, is movement. There's some other technologies that we're developing now to be able to defeat thermal that's out there. So there's cloaks that we have now that you can put on that will defeat thermal for a period of time before you have to switch it out or whatever. And also different nets and things that you can put over command posts to hide your signature in the spectrum.
Yep.
So you hide your hide in the EM spectrum. So there's a lot that technology is doing to enhance our capabilities, but also presents new vulnerabilities because adversaries also have those capabilities. So for every capability that we get, there's also a weakness that we discover with that. And with drones, just at the tactical level, soldiers are going to have to get really comfortable with operating in an environment where there are just drones everywhere and the enemy is going to see everything all the time. And so what that's going to come down to is you have to look insignificant. You have to look like you don't matter. And you hopefully won't be found at all. So you have to hide.
No, you're spot on. And so this has been a common theme, not just with drones, but with unmanned vehicles, unmanned systems in the commercial space. What's happened is initially people thought that let's use Tesla as an example. Tesla's a good example. They thought Tesla was going to be equipped with all these high-speed LiDAR detectors, LRFs, which the initial ones did. Like the initial Model S and the Roadster had this technology. And what happened was, now, and they also had optical sensors. So think like pretty good cameras, like pretty much, the cameras that come on your smartphones are incredible now for how inexpensive they are. And what they can do now is the optical sensors have gotten good enough, let's call them good enough and cheap enough to when they're paired with an AI ML algorithm, so an artificial intelligence machine learning algorithm, that optical sensor now has the ability to detect movement, to detect a human face or human outline from 1,000 meters away. And so the software technology has caught up in a way, and Tesla has switched pretty much all their new vehicles over to just all optical sensors because they're cheaper and they can just beef them up with supercharged software that can make decisions within the CPU of the car. And the drones are the same way. So what Austin is describing and what that DJI drone that you were holding can probably do is it can lock onto a human face because it's been fed a large data set of information, probably like tens of thousands of faces of different human beings, and it can lock onto your face. And so how a consumer would use it, like Austin, was, hey, you can fly the drone and it can follow you around as you walk around, whatever terrain, or if you want to film a little video or do a selfie video, the drone will follow you and lock onto your face. But that can also be weaponized, right? I mean, that can be weaponized like you're describing to where you don't need an expensive thermal sensor or an LRF on a drone. You just need a cheap camera that costs less than $100 and then software that's already built, it's already off the shelf. And you combine those two together, you have a very inexpensive weaponized drone that is not very hard to build and it's not very hard to deploy. So,
yeah, no, absolutely. And what I don't know, I can tell you that right now at the tactical level, the drones just aren't there. The units just don't have them for the most part. And so, like, if we were to go to war today, my personal assessment is that in terms of drones, I don't think that we're ready. But I don't think that that's a controversial opinion. I think people know that, and then they're working on that. So I know there's a problem that we're going after. But there's a couple things too, which is, if we're going to use drones, you're always faced with, look, do you want a bunch of cheap ones that are going to break, or you're going to lose them, or they're not going to be very secure? Or do you want higher end stuff that is going to be more survivable, that's going to have a lot more capabilities, it's going to have all the bells and whistles, it's not going to lose link, but you're not going to have as many of them. And so this isn't just an easy problem to solve, right?
no, it's not.
You can't just flood the army with a bunch of commercial off the shelf stuff. So the DJI drones, I'm pretty sure this is a Chinese company. All right, and they work off soldiers. They work off soldiers' smartphones. So they're using and so that's not going to work because
it's not.
You'll get targeted text messages to soldiers' families if they're using their own personal cell phones saying, "Hey, we know that your private so and so is a drone, is operating in this region in this whatever." So even if we weren't directly even if we weren't directly in conflict with the Chinese, if we were fighting somewhere else or operating somewhere, even just operating or just training somewhere else, they would more than likely have access to that data, or they'd be able to access that data. So the network that we use, or whatever system that we use to control those drones, has got to be more or less secure, or it's got to at least be somewhat robust. So the drone problem is not an easy problem to solve. So there's people out there just saying, well, just buy a bunch of stuff off the shelf and just flood the zone with it. That's not that. It's more complicated than that. It's harder than that.
Yeah, from my perspective, the DoD does a great job, leveraging COTS, commercial off-the-shelf products that are applicable for both a commercial applications and a defense application. So think like a laptop. A laptop, with some minor modification to the software, maybe some hardware modification, can be made into a military laptop, right? A camera, probably the same way. A drone is much different. The supply chain for a drone is a little more complex, and a lot of it stems from overseas, and could be susceptible to having software embedded in the system that could, maybe not have the best of intents, like you're saying. So I think what needs to happen is, I think there needs to be some sort of deliberate discussion, some strategic discussion between the U.S., maybe Japan, maybe Australia, maybe some European countries, where we need to build some sort of parallel industry, some sort of either U.S. or Japanese or European manufactured drones that have a supply chain to support, mass fielding of these types of drones. And they might be a little more expensive than a DJI, but I think you could get the price point down to like $2,500 per drone.
So it's an interesting idea. The first thing that comes to mind, and this is a common theme when you're talking about technology or when you're talking about military stuff overall, when you're talking about supply chains, is you want to have a mix between efficiency and robustness. And those things are always trade-offs. It's hard to make something more efficient and robust. So in theory, it would be very great if we could get everybody in the alliance, or everyone that's an ally, to be using more or less the same drone parts.
Correct.
As long as we keep the supply chain robust and diverse, so that we're not like, well, as it turns out, this one part is made in this one factory, outside of Memphis, and a tornado came through and destroyed the factory. And now that, so yeah,
that's a real thing. That's a real thing. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And so you always want to have, and that's another reason why, hey, just buying commercial off the shelf stuff doesn't always just work, is because, hey, what's the robustness of the supply chain if we get into, if we get into contact, or if we get into a shooting war? Is that supply chain going to be robust enough such that we can get more of the correct things to the front line, to the soldiers in time?
Yeah, you're spot on with your assessment. I think, there's two facets to that I kind of jog my memory, when you just mentioned that. So the robust supply chain, there's two things. As lithium ion batteries rapidly increase in their efficiency, and there's other materials that are being explored for better efficiencies for not only unmanned systems, but for actual like troop transport vehicles and hybrid electric drivetrains that the Army is exploring right now. The problem the Army is running into, I mean, the motor vehicle industry in the Army is so closely tied to, GM and that apparatus in Michigan that manufactures these engines, transmissions, components for wheeled vehicles and tracked vehicles. One of the challenges they're facing is, by the time the Army, signs off on all this acquisition to acquire a new battery cell, it might take 8 or 9 years. So 8 or 9 years is a long time in the commercial electronics industry. By then, that battery cell not only is it obsolete, it is obsolete. That battery cell is obsolete. The company that made it doesn't even make it anymore. They probably stopped making it 5 years ago. So it's like, that's the challenge you're going to run into with drones. And to create a common architecture, what's happening in the Ukraine is, people are using these FPV drones where a lot of the parts are manufactured in Taiwan or China, and they can be easily assembled. They all use interchangeable propellers. They all use interchangeable, flight control units and electronics that are basically bolted onto a chassis. So think like it's basically like the compatibility and the ease of making these drones is so widespread. But that relies heavily on a supply chain that would not survive a shooting conflict like you're describing. So, yeah, it's not an easy problem to solve. I know there's companies out there like Anduril that are exploring, ways to fix this problem, and I think they're doing a really, really nice job. But I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on like how do we get soldiers? I mean, it's so obvious to me that having either loitering munitions or drones that can just show a 10 digit grid, where someone is. It's so obvious to me that that would be an immediate game changer for an infantryman on the ground in combat. It's so obvious to me.
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting thought, and you've got to remember that when it comes to acquisition and when it comes to, hey, what equipment are we going to buy? Where are we going to put our money? Yes, we do want to take care of the individual soldiers, and making sure that platoons are equipped to go out and fight platoon fights. But really, when we're looking at echelon, we need to be able to equip the thinking was we need to be able to equip at higher echelon with more what's the word with a more a better piece of equipment that is going to help the entire division rather than a
Yep.
bunch of small pieces of equipment that are going to help a bunch of small platoons. So
Sure. Yep.
when we look at acquiring systems, we're really focused on, hey, what is going to make the division overall better as a multi-domain fighting force? Not, hey, what's going to make this one infantry platoon or all of our infantry platoons, what is going to make them 10, 15% more effective? It's what systems can we bring to bear that is going to bring our artillery, our combat aviation, all of our systems to bear at the same time. And so the focus is on finding those sort of larger assets that can fly deeper, and then the software and intelligence systems that those feed, and then the targeting systems and the radar systems, things like that. So it's the focus tends to be much larger on fighting at echelon, at scale, rather than thinking down to the platoon. Not that that doesn't happen. In fact, my unit is sending a group of people to there's some expedition day or exposition day or whatever it is, exhibition. That's the word. Exhibition day at another post. That I looked at the list, and it's all small drones. It's all about, hey, how do we get soldiers to carry water more efficiently? So it's not that that stuff isn't focused on. It's the question is who is focusing on it and how much money is being applied to it.
Totally.
So yeah, that's really what it comes down to. Is a lot of the times we just don't know what the problems and what the friction points will be once we get into combat. I'm reading a great book, and I've been reading it for a while. I'm always reading like 10 books at a time,
Yeah.
called Flesh and Steel During the Great War by a Frenchman named Michel Goya. And the subtitle is The Transformation of the French Army in World War I and the Invention of Modern War. I think that's the subtitle.
Cool.
And I wish I had it with me right here, because I could read it directly from it. But essentially what the book argues is that the transformation of the French army was not a top-down driven change effort. Like, it wasn't a bunch of generals or a bunch of reformers get in at the top and then push these changes down to the soldiers. Rather, it was the French army learning from their tactical experience, learning from the soldiers on the front line, and then things trickling back up. And I think if you were to look at combat and conflict more in more depth historically, you would find that that's a pretty common trend, is that it's the battlefield that dictates what technology is needed, and then whoever can adapt faster by getting that technology developed or getting that system or whatever it is developed, and then matching it to the right tactics and then applying it, is the side that's going to have an advantage. And typically we have been, as a country, extraordinarily good at this. So think about our counter IED stuff that we had. So we may not have had drones.
Good example. That's a good example.
But holy crap, did we have great tactics, techniques, procedures, and technology to find IEDs. Like, how much training on IEDs did we do before our deployment? I mean, it was a lot.
It was tons. It started in LDAC when we were still ROTC cadets. We did a day where we just focused on counter ID lanes, what to look for, what sort of technologies were being implemented to prevent these types of, catastrophic incidents. So yeah, no, you're totally right. Yeah.
And there were things like that we got that everyone had, like Goldies, which just found copper wire. Or you had the what were the systems that we wore as backpacks that jammed the radios? Whatever those were. Dukes. The Dukes and the Dukes for the vehicles and whatever it was for the stuff that we carried. The Thors? Yeah, Dukes and Thors.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
And like the ground penetrating radar that we had, and like all the Buffaloes. Think of all the technology we developed to counter IEDs. And so we are extraordinarily good at finding tactical problems, giving them to industry, saying this is a problem, and then them coming back with stuff that really works. I mean,
totally. Totally.
We had very little actual equipment failure. Like that stuff actually works. And so I think that that's ultimately what we're going to end up with is we'll get into a conflict, we'll be underprepared, but I think we're going to very quickly be able to equip soldiers with what they need to succeed at the tactical level. Right now, what we're trying to do, because think about it, when was the last time that a division really fought? An Army division fought as a division. And
that's a good question.
Really actually fought, right?
Korea?
So if we say
Vietnam?
I would say probably. My argument would be Korea.
Yeah. I'd say Korea.
Because, and, and when you go and you read about Korea, I mean, it was something to witness for sure. I mean, it was crazy. Is when you have divisions actually maneuvering and actually fighting. Now, you could use the 2003 invasion or you could use the Gulf War, but it's like, look, this was very short. We didn't really stress these systems. The casualties weren't super high. But hey, what happens when you're fighting as a division and you lose a brigade, which is a third of your force? And we haven't.
No, you're right.
And we haven't fought at that level yet. And so, no one currently serving has really fought as a division in a large scale combat operation, where for an extended period of time, where a lot of casualties are taken, where there's an enormous amount of stress with all those qualifiers. And so, but what we're doing is we're trying to figure out what does that fight actually look like. And so we're trying to anticipate that, and we're looking for technology systems to be able to go and fight as a division, not for a bunch of little platoons or a bunch of companies to go out and fight individually like we were during GWAT. And so that's where I think a lot of the focus has been, is on at the division level, equipping the division with the right artillery systems, with the right drone systems, with the right combat aviation systems, with these big ticket platforms to equip the division to go and fight as a division. I think, like I said, that's where our focus has been. But I think once we get into conflict, those big problems are already going to be solved, or at least we'll have very good solutions for them. And I think that there will be more room to say, hey, here's a bunch of tactical problems at the company and below level that we can very quickly solve with tech solutions.
I think you're spot on. I think it was incredible how rapidly some of these offices in the Pentagon were stood up and funded to get counter IED tactics and equipment out to the battlefield. And just amazing. And not just new technology, but modifying existing programs of record to be more IED resistant. And that's one of the things. I'm glad you mentioned it, because fighting at echelon is something that we've kind of gotten away from the last 20 years, like you so eloquently described during the GWAT. And so what are the questions that the Army is trying to answer right now, and what the military is trying to answer right now? Because we still have a lot of legacy systems that were designed in the 50s and 60s that have been obviously modified, probably a dozen times since then. But a lot of these systems were not. Some of these systems were designed before the advent of G.P.S, which is kind of crazy to think about. And they're still in service: aircraft, vehicles, different weapon systems. And a lot of times when you crack open an Army program of record, it's very difficult to make any sort of major design changes. Those programs are often poured in concrete through these really, really intense, deliberate design efforts between the DoD and industry. And so how do you get those small sensors and drones that you're describing that we want to get in the hands of soldiers? How do we get those to effectively communicate with legacy systems? I think that's what you're kind of getting at. And how do you get them all working together the most efficient way? That's a really difficult problem to solve, I feel like.
I'm not sure it's a problem that needs to be solved. So,
It might not be. Yeah.
well, when you think about it, look, does a platoon's drone that's designed to fly 300 meters and find some bad guys, do you really need that drone to be feeding some big situational awareness beast that goes up to the division headquarters or even to the battalion headquarters for somebody to know about something? Or do you just want to give them the piece of technology and just let the systems develop organically? So to your point, there's a big focus on people want everything to be efficient. They want
Yep.
everything to feed into the one system.
They do.
The killer app. They want the killer app, right? The killer
They do.
war app.
I'm not sure it's necessary either. Yeah, I'm not sure it's necessary either.
Right. And so, there are companies out there that are trying to do this. Like Palantir has a system that the DoD uses that's designed to integrate all of these different feeds from all of these different places and give it to you in a single user interface, which is what Palantir is known for. I mean, that's what they do, right? They take a lot of different data streams, a lot of different databases, and they use AI or whatever it is that they do to put it all together. And that stuff is quite useful, and there's a lot of units that use that system and really like it. But let me complicate it significantly, because there's a piece of software that the Army uses for training called WarSim. And there are systems that work great in real life because they get your real life drone feeds and they talk to real life databases, but they don't replicate in WarSim. And so you don't end up using the systems that you would use in real life. You don't actually end up using those systems in training.
Interesting. Yes. Yeah. It's good. Good point. Really good point.
And so to your point, it's like, how do we make all these legacy systems talk? Which is the systems that we have nowadays aren't feeding WarSim directly. And I won't go into too many specifics here, but that is a huge problem, which is the software that we use to train us that gives us to back up and give a little bit more perspective to people. When we go and do war games as a division headquarters, we're not going out there with 17,000 people and fighting, right? That would be a little silly. It's the division headquarters that is using simulated units, and we have people that come and they're sort of like acting as that unit, or they're not acting, they're playing that unit, but in the simulator. So rather than instead of a company commander commanding a company of soldiers, you might have a company commander show up and puck, what's called puck, a battalion. Maybe he represents a battalion commander or whatever it is. And so you're giving orders to these units and they're moving them in the computer. And so all the effects that you want simulated need to be simulated in the computer. And it's a very robust system. I'm not saying it's a bad system, but the problem is there's a lot of systems that just don't talk to WarSim. And this causes like I said, this can cause a number of problems in how units train for war with the systems that they have. But getting those systems to talk is difficult. It's not an easy problem to solve, and I'm not sure. It may be so complex that you can't solve it. What you do want to do is focus on. You're not going to come up with a killer app. Okay, you're not going to come up with one system and make everything backwards compatible and make everything talk to each other. It's just not going to happen. Nor, like I said, you probably don't want that either. What you do need to do is make sure that at a local level, the things that are talking need to be talking, so that radars are talking to guns, for example. So like counterfire radars are actually tied into the same systems that the guns are tied into, and things like that, so that you can effectively do counterfire. That's where the challenge is going to be. It's not about making everything work together. It's about making the things, it's identifying what do we really need to work together, and then focusing on making sure those little things can work together. Sorry, I can keep going here.
No. I think I have got a bunch of questions about what you just said. I like where you're going with this.
Well, yeah. So, what do you got? Because I could just keep going on for hours here.
No. So I want to talk to that captain who just pinned on the rank, and maybe he's going back to his career course at Fort Moore, Georgia, to go through the maneuver center, or maybe he's going to do the Marine Corps equivalent. Maybe he's an infantry officer in the Marine Corps. Speak to this guy for a second. How do you he's poised for a very successful career as an infantryman, as an infantry leader in the military. how have you as a company commander and as a staff officer too, how do you encourage training exercises that are not only like realistically, but like how do you train as you fight? That's one thing that I'm really keen on, because there's a ton of effort and there's a ton of funding being poured into these simulation technologies. You know, you can simulate anything from, you know, plugging a bullet wound on a medical doll, like, you know, a medical doll that's realistic, to, you know, shooting a weapon in a virtual reality environment, like, and then everything in between, driving a vehicle, doing a massive, you know, war game through war sim. How what how have you been successful in like training your soldiers the way you would fight in combat? That's kind of one thing I'm curious about.
So when you talk about simulations, one of the guys you really need to get on here to talk to is my buddy Cole Patton,
Okay,
who's a FA-57, absolutely
cool.
brilliant guy, and he knows more about AR than VR and VR than anyone else. Um, there's not a really good tech answer, I would say. The advice that I would give to any, you know, company commander, someone that's just pinned on the rank of captain, what they really need to be focused on, I mean, I have some sort of unconventional views here, but what they
Yeah,
really need to be focused on is their soldiers and making sure their soldiers are taken care of. And part of that, a huge part of that is, like you said, is training. I wrote a memo to all of my soldiers, or to all my leaders, when I was a company commander, about what we call servant leadership. And I think a lot of times servant leadership can get misunderstood. There's a lot of different ways to understand it, but the way that I think of servant leadership is, you have got to be the guy that is willing to tell people the really hard things that they must do in order to survive on the battlefield. Nobody wants to be, well, maybe someone wants to be a jerk, but for the most part, nobody wants to be a jerk. But as it turns out, and you'll relate to this, in Ranger School, when you are on top of on top of a mountain or in a swamp, and it is raining, and you are cold, and you are hungry, do you want a platoon leader? Let's say you're a squad leader. Do you want the platoon leader to pull all the squad leaders in and say, oh, "Okay, guys, I'm really happy to be your platoon leader. I'm going to do my best. What do you guys think we should do? What do you think is our next step?" You know, if you get that guy, you're like, oh man, it's gonna be a long night, you know, because that
totally.
guy,
Yeah,
he's trying to be nice, he's trying to be inclusive, he's trying to build consensus, but that's not who you want. That's not who you want when it's raining and you're cold and you're tired and you're hungry
it's not who you
and
need. That's
you're
yeah.
fighting.
No,
Right? Nobody wants that. Nobody needs that. What you want is the guy that brings the squad leaders in and is like, hey, check it out. Here's the plan. You do this. You do that. You do this. You have 15 minutes. Come back here as soon as you're done. And then, you know, then we'll move on to the next thing, and blah, 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 blah. And you're like, if you get that guy as you're setting up your patrol base, you're like, yes, like we might get to sleep tonight because we're going to get this done really, really quickly and really efficiently. So everybody needs that guy at that time. So when it comes to commanding a company, that's really the focus that I would tell them to look at, which is like, look, obviously nobody wants to be a jerk, but especially with the military these days, is you have to focus on discipline. It's not about doing the right ritual squad live fire or team live fire or platoon live fire and planning that just right with all these different training variables. That stuff's important. You do want to focus on that. You know, you want to get that done, but that's not where you're going to make your money, and that's not what's going to keep your soldiers alive in combat. What's going to make you effective in combat is having an extraordinarily tight team of
yep,
people who are ready to fight, are ready to learn quickly, and really to drive this point home. When I was a company commander, my goal was to spend as little time in the field as possible, and I had a feeling that training in general was just overvalued. That at a certain point, you're just not getting any better. And so I had all my exercises were as short as I could possibly justify them. But I focused on morale. I really focused on the family readiness group, making sure soldiers were taken care of.
yeah.
Really put a lot of emphasis on that. I also put a lot of emphasis on chaptering out a lot of really bad soldiers, and so cutting the chaff, or, you know, pulling the weeds, if you will. So really focused on that. And so we were if you looked on paper, we were probably the least trained company because we had the least range time. We had the least time doing tactical exercises, But when it came down to the company live fire exercise, where it was all the companies in the brigade doing the exact same exercise, which was a breach of an obstacle and then attacking an enemy bunker complex.
Yeah.
My company did it like way faster and
Yeah.
way more efficiently than anybody else by like a wide margin. Like it wasn't even close. And really that just had to do with, it wasn't that we had done the right training. It was that we all trusted each other and we knew that, hey, when the time comes, we're going to execute violently and we're going to execute with a lot of aggressiveness and we're going to listen to each other and we're going to trust each other. And we're gonna kind of know each other's left and right limits. And by developing that organizational culture, we were able to really do well in training, do really well on deployment, and that's the type of unit that you want to take forward. So I know that's not a great technology answer, but a lot of the times, you do want to focus on that good training, and there are great tech solutions, and I can actually talk about an idea that I have. But for a new company commander, that's what you need to hear. That's what you need to focus on.
No, I think you're right. I think anytime I've been a part of a large, or anytime I've been a part of like a high performing team or organization, that's an underlying theme, is that everybody has this mutual trust. Everyone's rowing in the same direction, and it's not really about the quantity and how often you go out to the field and how often you're out there in a sleeping bag, but it's about the quality of the cohesiveness within the unit, and that's really hard to achieve. But people, it's often overlooked. People are so focused on the objectives and the metal tasks, and they often overlook, hey, these people are human beings. These are human beings, right? Like they're not robots. Like you can't just program them and say, hey, you need to do this X number of times and you get X output. That's not how human beings operate. And so many people, both in the corporate world and in the military, feel like they just need to treat people like robots and just do X, Y, Z, and you'll get this outcome. And it's not true.
So yes, there is that. I have this great one of my YouTube videos is on leadership, and I talk about compliance and commitment and how they're two different sides of sides of the spectrum. So yes, you do have a lot of people that are really focused on compliance. It's like we really want people to follow the rules and do the things that they're supposed to do. But you got to remember, there are also people that just want to be your friend and don't drive compliance and don't drive performance. And so
Right.
anytime we're talking about leadership, you've got to remember that you've got this two ends of the spectrum of people that are, driving on one end and just, they want to be your friend, they want to be your buddy on the other. And really what you're aiming for is that balance between the two, where you're using commitment-based methods of influence in the right context, you're using compliance-based methods in the right context, and putting those two together. So anyway, yeah, that's sort of my leadership spiel.
No, you're spot on. I think I saw that video. I like that theme. So one of the theme too is I like that you put a memo out to all your leaders. That's a really that's a good thing for a leader to do to gain alignment. I want to talk about failure, because this is one thing that I wish I'd failed more in my 20s. I wish I'd taken some bigger swings, but I was too timid and I was too afraid of the negative outcomes of failure, and it prevented me from trying things. That I probably, maybe I would have succeeded, maybe I would have failed, but that's not the point. The point is failure is a good thing. I've learned more from my failures in my life than I ever have from my successes. Sometimes my successes are just more of a relief. They feel like I'm like, oh, I'm so glad that's over. So I worked so hard and I busted my butt to do something, and I'm just glad it's over. I just don't even want to think about it anymore. That's how a lot of my successes feel. But my failures are soul crushing, and they stay like etched in my memory. And my failures, and so I encourage my guys right now that you should fail. You should step out of your comfort zone and fail occasionally or often, because that's how you grow. How do you facilitate an environment where failure is okay to a certain degree? I mean, obviously you don't want to have failures that'll be really,
Sure.
really detrimental, but yeah.
So no, great question. One of the first essays that I wrote for the distro was called Fail Seeding, and you've probably seen it, you've probably read it.
That's amazing.
And
Yeah.
I talk about this very topic, where you use failure as a tool to succeed more than if you had just not failed in the first place. And so I tell a story in there about I had just taken over command, literally a couple days in the seat. I had a brand new executive officer. His name is Jake. We're still great friends to this day. And
Cool.
then we had a brand new battalion commander as well. And so the battalion executive officer calls down to my executive officer and is like, the battalion commander is going to walk through the motor pool. And, I think I'm on this email chain too. And he's going to walk through the motor pool and he wants everything, he wants to know stuff about the motor pool. It's like, cool. So I tell my XO, hey man, this is your baby. You got this. You need help? If you need help, I'm here. But otherwise, I'm not doing anything with this. Like, this is all you. And he was like, yep, I think I got it. And I was like, nope.
No, you don't. No, you don't.
I was like, no, you don't. I could see the train coming in slow motion.
I'm reliving this.
Right.
I've been in his shoes. We've been in his
shoes. And I was like, I know this isn't going to work out. And you know what? That's going to be just fine. Sure enough, battalion commander shows up. It's like, we don't even know which containers are ours. We don't have keys for anything. The vehicles is like, we should 5988. It's like, well, what even is 5988? I mean, we're just like so jacked up. It's not even funny. So the battalion commander turns to me and he's just like, your company failed this week. And he's a great guy. And he was a great leader, but he was very straight up. He was like, you failed horribly. Do better. And I was like, yes, sir, we will do better. I promise we will do better. And I took responsibility. I wasn't like, well, sir, am I, it's like Adam in the garden.
Don't deflect. Like, you can't deflect that.
The woman that you gave me.
It was their fault.
You gave me.
It was their fault. Yeah.
So, right. Exactly.
Yeah.
No, anyone that's in the military knows that is not how it works at all. I was like, sir, this is completely this is my responsibility. I've got this for action. And this is my fault. It's not going to happen again. So, everyone in the military understands that level of ownership. Yep. And so I thought this was my last job in the Army. Like, I thought I was going to get out of the Army after this, and not because of that incident, but that was just I was like, I'll finish command and then I'll get out.
Yep.
So anyway, I go to my office. I could not care less about what had just happened. Poor Jake comes in and he's crushed. No one wants to let down. Yeah, no one wants to let down the organization like that. And I was like, Jake, buddy, look. First of all, we're a light infantry unit. Like, who cares about our vehicles? They're not pacing items. Like,
I was about to ask you about that. I was about to ask you about that too. Yeah.
If it was a tank unit, this would have been a much different conversation. But no, this is a light infantry unit. The vehicles are like, they're mildly interesting. And so, but I tell him, I'm like, look, this is. I could have stepped in. I could have stopped this if I wanted to. But the reason I didn't was because I need you to feel that, like, hey, I'm not coming to save you, brother. Like, the stuff that you do, it matters. Like, it really matters.
It does. It does.
If you don't follow through, if you don't succeed, this entire organization will fail. And you got to understand that. And
yeah, it's a lot of pressure for company XO.
It's a lot of pressure, but it's a lot of pressure for all my leaders, for all leaders. And so that was the technique that I used. Was I needed everyone to go through a failure as much as possible to feel that, hey, daddy ain't coming to the rescue. There is no cavalry. Like, you mess up, hey man, your platoon's dead. I don't know what to tell you. No one's coming to help you. And I tell the story in the essay that I wrote, but basically the reason I knew that this was so important was everyone talks about, everyone knows about I Durang and about Hal Moore and about 1-7 Cavalry. People that have watched the movie, 1-7 Cav led by Hal Moore, who's a famous military leader. They go out, they defeat a much larger NVA force. 2-7 Cav was 1-7 Cav's sister battalion. And they also were in I Durang. They also got into contact with the NVA, and they were absolutely cut to pieces. I mean, it was a disaster. Leadership completely fell apart. And I got to meet guys from 1-7 and 2-7, and they both came and talked about their experience when I was at Fort Moore. Now, it used to be Fort Benning, now Fort Moore, about their experience. And the guys from 2-7, there was a guy who was like a platoon leader or sergeant, and he was like, well, surely there's a major or there's a lieutenant colonel or someone's going to come and tell me what to do. He's pinned down in an ambush and he's just waiting for someone to be like, hey, brother, this is what you need to do, or this is what. And I was like, I'm sitting there like horrified, like, oh my goodness. I can't imagine how terrifying that must be. And I told myself then, my leaders will never feel that way. Like, they must feel empowered to act.
Yep.
And so if you're going to empower your leaders
100%.
to act, if you're going to empower your leaders to act, they cannot be afraid to fail. And they have to know that if something goes wrong, it's on them. But omission is significantly more dangerous than commission. And people can go read the whole essay, or you can have there's Substack has a great system where you can have the AI read it to you. So I'd highly recommend that. But I would say there's a caveat, and the caveat, as a quick aside, caveat means warning, comes from the Latin cave. It does not mean I want to echo the thing that just said. It means I want to give a warning. And so a caveat to the thing I just said is so you have fail seeding, which is allowing failure to happen, seeing it happen and letting it happen so that you can let your subordinates feel the pain and know that their actions matter. So that's fail seeding. But you can also have failishizing, which is obviously a play on fetishizing. And that's essentially fetishizing failure, where people get obsessed with, oh, well, we're new, so we're going to fail a lot. And this, you see this a lot in startups. And I again, this is in an essay of that name. I think it's called Failishizing, where I talk about a relative who worked at a tech startup, which, as you can guess, no longer exists because they were obsessed. They were like, well, failure's good because then we're gonna get to learn and da-da-da-da. And every time they failed, it was just like, yeah, failure's good. High five for failure. And it's like, no, like failure is only good insofar as it enables you to realize how bad it is so that you stop failing.
Correct. Yeah.
And it can propel you to do better than if you artificially stop the failure from happening. But if something goes wrong, it's not high five, we failed. It's, hey, what went wrong and how do we keep that from happening? And let's input systems and processes or put the right people against the problem to make sure that this doesn't happen anymore. So a lot of times we get the bumper sticker version of like, hey, failure's good. Like, yeah, failure good. But it's, hey, let's take this. Let's actually see what happens if we go all the way with this. So you don't want to go all the way towards failishizing. Failure is good. Let it happen. But then you've got to clean up behind the failure to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So this is kind of that's sort of my pitch on failure and the importance of it. Really what it comes down to is in going back to your original question, which was, how do you make this happen in your organization? The answer is courage.
Yep.
That's what it takes.
Yeah, it takes courage.
It takes courage as a leader to say, hey, boss man who's coming down and is going to see my organization fail, I am sorry. Like, this is my fault. I allowed this failure to happen. And that takes courage. Nobody wants to fail in front of their boss. No one wants to look stupid, especially the higher up you go, the harder it is. But you've got to be willing to take chances, and you've got to be willing, to give top cover when you will tell your people to take chances, and you enable them to take chances. You've got to give them top cover when they make the organization look bad. You've got to take responsibility for it, and not in like a soft way where you sort of imply that it was your subordinate's fault. It was like, no, I told him to do that. Like, even if you have to go a little bit farther than maybe exactly the truth is, you have to cover for your subordinates to make sure that they don't feel the wrath of the full failure. And like I said, there's more caveats and things that I write in the essay, but that's the general pitch.
Yeah, I really believe your job as a leader is to provide that top cover you're describing in a meaningful way, in a genuine way. You're actually going to provide that top cover that they deserve, and also foster an environment for them to get out of their comfort zone, to have them grow, and be in a position where they could take over your role. I mean, I'm constantly looking for ways to transfer any limited skill sets from my toolkit, to the guys I work with, and with the hopes that, hey, you should be able to take over my position. Like, I should be able to give you as many of, like, look at my utility belt. It's limited. I'm not that, I'm not that experienced, but like, I want to give you every available, toolkit that I've developed. And that, because I've had some really good leaders, both in the Army and in the corporate world, that took me under their wing and kind of like say, hey, this is what we're doing. Let me show you how to do it. Okay. I showed you how to do it. Now you go try it. And I fell on my face. And I like, okay, go try it again. And I fell on my face, but it was a little more graceful. And they're like, okay, let's do this again. Let's regroup. You messed up again. And then, they let you fly, and you spread your wings, and you have to figure out how to foster an environment to do that, where the people, don't feel betrayed that you're going to like just leave them hanging out there to dry. So
100%. And the thing, there's a couple of hard truths that I try to write about, things that are hard that people kind of overlook. And one of the things in one of the essays that I wrote, I talk about you really need to put a lot of your focus onto people's strengths and not try to fix their weaknesses. People feel an obligation that just because they have a leader on their team or they have someone on their team, they've got to put all their energy and focus into making sure this one person succeeds. And a lot of times it's just not going to happen. Like if someone's just not cutting it, you really got to be careful about how much time and energy you're willing to invest in someone that's just probably not going to, they're probably just not going to cut it. It's going to be better for you and for them to just find the one or two things that they can do well and really narrow the scope of their work as much as possible to the things that they can do and do well, rather than try to expand them too much too quickly. I'm not saying give up on people completely, but don't get obsessed with finding someone has a weakness and then thinking that it's your job that you've got to go out and, fix that weakness. You're going to waste a lot of your time doing that. And you're going to waste a lot of their energy and your energy and the organization's energy doing that as well. So you really, when it comes to, again, teaching people about the importance of failure, who you're going to let fail, be intentional about that. Push people, challenge people. But once it's pretty clear that you've got someone who's not going to cut it, don't let them fail anymore. So be selective is what it comes down to. You've got a high performer, push them, make them fail, or give them opportunities to fail, but don't feel obligated that you've got to do that equally for everybody. You don't.
Yeah, that's a hard truth, and that's something that I've come across before, and it's and sometimes it's just not a good fit. I mean, sometimes the person's skill sets are better matched for another role, like you mentioned, or another, maybe another way they can contribute to the organization. But it's a hard truth. A couple of things I wanted to ask you. What technologies are you most excited about in the future? It doesn't have to be military related. Maybe it can be military related, but like what technologies are you stewing about? When you're sitting at your desk in your office or in the weekends, like what are you thinking about? Like what technologies are cool to you?
It's really funny that you asked that. So I took this course at the Command and General Staff College. I took a course called Future Hunters, and as far as I can tell, this course no longer exists. And in Future Hunters, they were teaching these techniques to be able to look for signals and try to predict what was going to happen in the future and stuff like that. And what technologies are going to be out there. And one of the final assignment for the class was you had to write a vignette of a future conflict and how technology was going to interact with that. And in my opinion, people just wrote the most ridiculous stuff, like just insane.
Oh, yeah?
Especially given the time. It was like, it was like in the next 20 or 30 years or something like that. So inside of our lifetime, and people are talking about, spaceships and fighting on Mars and like all that. Sure, maybe that's possible. I don't know. One guy was like Bitcoin bro, and he wrote like a whole thing about how Bitcoin was like wars are gonna be fought over Bitcoin, and I was just like, what?
Oh my gosh,
it was the
really?
dumbest
Wow.
stuff. It was, and yeah, I just thought it was just like super dumb. So I just didn't think that they were really thinking about, like, they're using their imagination. There was like a lot of divergent thinking where it's like, well, what might happen? I think when we're talking about future technology, and actually there's a guy who wrote a book called The Future of War, a History, which he looks at the history of how people looked at the future of war.
Okay.
I haven't read the book, but I heard him present on it a while back. But anyway, so I just want to throw that out there, that my ideas are kind of similar to what I heard him espouse, which is there's going to be a lot of continuity. And so if you've ever heard of do you know the concept of Lindy? Have you ever heard of the concept of Lindy?
No, never heard of it.
Lindy is popularized by an author named Nassim Taleb, whose work I really like. But the idea of Lindy is the longer something has been around, the more likely it is to stay around. So if you think of like a drinking glass,
you're right. Yeah.
Like how long has a drinking glass been around? I mean, like Venetian glass, like regular drinking glass have been around for thousands of years.
Yeah.
What is a glass, a drinking glass, going to look like in 500 years? It's probably going to look a lot like the drinking glasses that we have now. Because it's just it works. It's been around. It's probably going to stay around. The idea with Lindy is not that new technologies are bad or that they're not going to stay around. It's just when you're talking about probability, the newer something is, the less likely it is that it's going to stay around.
Yeah, you're
So
right.
it's probably going to get replaced by
Yeah.
something else. So when we look at the future of war and we look at future technologies, and I know this is sort of a meta answer to your question, and I will answer your question directly. But when we think about the future, what we want to think about, what I want to think about is what are the things that have been true about war for a really long time that are going to stay true? What are the continuities in war? What technologies have been around that are likely to stay around? And when you start thinking that way, you think a lot more, you can think and start to converge on some more concrete things rather than thinking divergently about like, what might the world look like in 20 or 30 years? Like, well, I don't know, man. I can't tell you what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
So when you read, so I wrote a vignette. It was actually called The Vignette, about a future infantry battle, maybe 20 or 30 years from now, what I thought that looked like. And what it looks like is basically a infantry battle from World War II with, you've got some drones, you've got some robotic machine guns, you've got way better night vision, you've got way better thermals. And so it's a lot of the technology that we have now, but it's just way better. So imagine thermals, like right now, thermals, the batteries run out super fast. So just making thermals more efficient, making them lighter, and making them more powerful. Also integrating things like artificial intelligence, like you were talking about, where a thermal signature to you might not see a thermal signature, but an AI might say, hey, look, I can see this heat pattern that you can't see. I can see this thermal pattern, and I can tell that's actually a person walking 300 meters through thick woods or something like that, right?
Totally.
So that's just an idea. Or using night vision to, we need night vision to give us a much better idea of who's around you. So I don't know if there's some way. I'm not even a big tech guy, but what I would imagine is night vision that you can put on and look around you and basically see the names of everyone who's wearing that night vision, right? Or at least see that they're in your organization or have some way to like signal them. Because right now we use infrared flashes, and we're on our nods, we use infrared flashes.
Yeah.
Well, that's not going to work. That's not going to work now because the enemy has night vision and they'll see our infrared flashes from like way far away. So I don't know if there's some type of directional Wi-Fi signal that you can send that's super short wave that won't get picked up, where it's like, hey, this person is, it'll look like they're sending you some type of signal or something like that. So I am very optimistic about what we can do with night vision, what we can do with thermals. I'd like to see much lighter bullets, fired much more quickly from lighter guns. I'm really excited about robotics. Like, for example, you don't have to make a machine gun work robotically, you don't need a whole bunch of equipment. You need to throw something on the trigger mechanism that has a remote control. You need an optic that's sending something to an iPad, and you need a tripod on which you can use the same controller to traverse. That's not a big ask. It's not.
It's not. No,
it's not. I don't need a whole big robot that is able to, you got to drive through the woods and change the batteries out all the time and blah, 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 blah. Look, just give me a tripod that can traverse and elevate the machine gun with an optic that I can see through my iPad. I can have one person sneak up. Just, remember putting in those support by fire positions. I can have one person sneak up with the machine gun, put it in place, come back, and then just shoot it remotely.
I like this a lot.
Like, you can build that tomorrow. I mean, that's not even.
It's probably, there's probably a prototype out there already, I would imagine.
I would hope so. I'm hoping someone is working on that. So
yeah, I'm pretty sure there is.
So when you ask me about like, hey, what future technologies are there going to be? It's like, hey, just combine a whole bunch of the stuff that we already know exists, that we already know it works just fine, and just turn it up to 11. Just turn it up to 11.
I like that. No, I think you're right. I think we're still going to be shooting, projectiles out of steel tubes for a long time. And those will get better, more accurate, but I think we'll have better versions of what we're already using. But I think you're right. I think some of the technologies will come and go. I think the technologies that are new are much more likely to not stick around.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I never thought about that.
Think about entertainment, right? When what was before cassettes? 8 tracks? Was there something before 8 tracks? I guess there was vinyl. Actually, I've got some vinyl here, but so you actually had vinyl, and then you went to 8 track, and then you went to cassette, and then you went to micro cassette, and then you went to CDs, and
pretty quickly too.
Right, pretty quickly. And so
Yeah.
you get something like the cassette tape, and you're like, oh wow, cassettes like the new thing. Like, look at all the cool things we can do with cassettes. And then
I bet
they
you
go away.
MP3 has been. I think MP3 has been around longer for like a longer duration. If you think like mass adoption, than cassettes probably were.
Probably, yeah. You're
I
probably
think.
right.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's right. And like I said, the longer it's been around, the more likely it is to stay around. So MP3 files have been around, I guess, I mean, geez, at least since the 90s, since we were kids. It's been around, coming up on probably 30 years. It'll probably be around for another 30 years before it gets replaced. And that's
Probably.
essentially what the Lindy rule is, which is, hey, like I said, the longer something's been around, the more likely it is to stay around. And when you think about future and you think about technology, that's how you should think, which is what's been around for a long time, what's likely to stay around. Obviously, the other thing that we could talk about when we talk about the future is communications.
Yeah.
Right now, it's just we're using basically the same radios we're using in Vietnam.
Pretty much.
That's another area where I just don't, and I'm not a tech guy. I'm sure there's reasons for this, but I just don't see why I can't have a regular walkie-talkie that sends an encrypted message through the whatever to talk to the people that I need to talk to, and that it's easy to change the channel. And I'm sure that there are technical reasons, there are technical limitations, there's things like that, but I also am sure that there are ways to overcome those, and that's where I would like to see innovation, which is just everything that we currently have smaller, lighter, easier to use, more efficient, more robust, whatever.
Oh, heck yeah. I couldn't agree more. I think you're spot on with that. What I like to do, there's so much more I want to cover with you. Might do another episode one day, but I like to reserve the last several minutes to see if you had any questions for me. I try to open up the dialogue a little bit towards the end to see if there's anything that was spurred by this conversation, or if there are things you're thinking about that you wanted to ask me to further discuss. So I wanted to kind of open up the floor to you. So,
one of the things that I know you're really big into aviation, and the combined arms fight between the ground and the air has always been somewhat contentious between the Army and the Air Force, because the Air Force, God love them, they're great, love Air Force guys. They just want to do Air Force stuff. Like, they just want to exist up in the sky and be like,
it's cool.
We'll clear out the sky above 20,000 feet. We'll dominate that. We'll get you supremacy, but then like figure it out. Like, we don't want to like bomb people and stuff. We just want to you figure that out. So there's a couple of ideas that I've had, which is, this is why we have attack helicopters. And attack helicopters are great. The Apache's great. One, do you know of anything that is coming to replace the Apache, or anything that is, what are the big innovations coming in rotary wing? And then the other question I have is, what do you think about, and I think people have floated this idea, it's not like I came up with this on my own, why doesn't the Army take the A-10 from the Air Force?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a valid inquisition. So the A-10 is a really interesting platform. I'm like fascinated by the A-10. I've seen one in person a handful of times up close on a ramp. It's such old technology now that they don't keep it super secure. So you'll see A-10s in commercial airports occasionally. They'll stop for fuel on a training exercise. Yeah, the A-10's a phenomenal tool, and it was specifically designed to take out tanks in the Fulda Gap, right, in eastern Germany and in that area. But it's very slow. It's kind of a straight wing aircraft, so it's not super aerodynamic. And what the trade off with an airplane is, it can either be really fast, but be really, really crappy at flying slow. If the wings are made to be aerodynamic, like think of the space shuttle. The space shuttle is a good example of this. Super aerodynamic, but it cannot fly slow. It has to fly fast to have enough air movement over the airfoil
to the point. Do you know
you
know John Boyd, energy maneuverability theory?
I've heard the name. I'm not familiar with the theory though.
It's essentially what you said, which is like, hey, just because something can go like super fast, what if you needed to go really slow and like turn and do this stuff, like
precisely
to move around. And so I'm not an expert on Boyd or energy maneuverability theory, but that was his thing, which is like, it's not just about going forward really fast. It's about being able to maneuver that energy from one vector to another and back.
Precisely. And that was kind of the impetus of the F-22 program. And so that's the trade-off. So if you have an aircraft that, say, it's flying between 350 and 400 knots, so that's under 500 miles an hour, let's call it, which is where the A-10 falls. It's got 2 turbofans, a relatively straight wing, tons of awesome armament systems, and then survivability systems to protect the pilot. It's basically a titanium bathtub that the pilot sits in. So the survivability of the aircraft's amazing. There's nothing like it, but it's very, very susceptible to being taken down by either manpads or shoulder-fired weapons or enemy aircraft. It's just super susceptible to that, as is the AC-130 gunship. It's a very slow-moving,
I would also say
big target.
As is the AH-64 Apache.
So yeah, I mean, so I want to answer your second question.
Problem.
Yeah, I want to answer your second question because it's a really good question. The Apache has advanced so much, especially the longbow variant of the Apache is incredible, as is all the variants of the Apache are awesome. But what the Apache is turning into is the Apache might not necessarily have to be in the direct fight, engaging the fight with their 30mm autocannons and their missiles and whatever armament systems are equipped on that aircraft. I think the Apache, there's a good chance that it might become more of a command and control aircraft, where it might be a platform. You might replace some of those armament systems with loitering munitions that can be deployed from the air. So that gives you the advantage of more range. If you launch a loitering munition from 10,000 feet versus 0 feet AGL from a ground site, you just have more that you could do. The altitude gives you energy and reduces the amount of energy that you have to expend to get altitude. I think the Apache is slowly becoming a capability that is going to become more of a command and control aircraft, deploying multiple loitering munitions for different use cases. And I think the F-35 could morph into that as well. There's a couple programs that I think are Navy or Marine Corps funded, where you basically have an aircraft, a manned aircraft, surrounded by an array of unmanned aircraft. And I like this a lot. I think it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, to answer your question, the Apache has been advanced so much that it's almost a question of, do we need another rotary wing platform? And for troop carrying, for the ability to carry troops, further and faster, the answer is yes, we probably do. We probably need some sort of tilt rotor system that can carry troops to the battlefield. But as far as an attack helicopter goes, the Apache has been modified to the extent to where it's like, man, do we really need another attack helicopter? That's a real question that the Army is asking. Do we need another attack helicopter? Of course, we want another attack helicopter. Do we need another attack helicopter? That's the question. Or can the Apache be modified in a way that it just becomes that much more lethal on the battlefield? So it's a cool concept. I mean, the Apache, it's unlikely the Apache's going anywhere. And like you said, it's been in service for a long time. And like that law that you mentioned, the aircraft that have been in service and have a proven track record are likely to be, people are going to lobby for that aircraft to stay in service for a longer period of time. And we've seen that with a lot of the older bombers that are in the Air Force inventory as well. They do a lot of modifications to keep those aircraft in service. So yeah.
Well, Jack, this has been super fun, man.
Yeah, I know. We got to do another episode. I can't believe it's like...
we have to do another episode.
Yeah, but I appreciate you hopping on, dude. And I've really enjoyed the content you've kind of put out there to be not only helpful for young leaders, but kind of give maybe civilians that have never served in the military kind of a glimpse of what it's like to be an Army officer. I think it's a really cool profession. I think it's a noble way to live out your life, and it's important what you're doing. So I'm glad there's leaders that care about soldiers and have a strong emphasis on making the lives of soldiers better, like you are. It seems like that's a key part of what you're trying to accomplish in your career, and I think that's valuable. So and you're going to reach a position here pretty soon where you're going to be contemplating threats in the way out future. 20, 30, 40 years, you're going to be contemplating threats and sitting in some office in the Pentagon. Maybe not the most enjoyable job, but it's an important job to have the foresight and get the equipment and the tactics down to soldiers so they can be prepared for the next conflict. But I think it's really cool what you're doing. So keep doing what you're doing, man.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Anybody who's interested can go to thedistro.substack.com or youtube.com/Austin Caroe, AUSTINCAROE, and they can find me there.
Cool. And I'll link them both in the show notes. So you guys will have direct links to both his written content and then his video content on YouTube. But dude, thank you so much, brother. I really appreciate the conversation.
Of course. No, I really appreciate it, Jack. And then last thing, just want to emphasize, I speak only for myself, not for the United States Army. And it's in all my content. So my newsletters, my videos, not speaking for the Army, not speaking for the government, speaking only for myself. So thanks, Jack.
Yes, sir.